Hello, dear colleagues. It's a pleasure to welcome you today to this seminar hosted by the CERE Observatory. This is the international platform for dialogue, exchange, and mutual learning on education, skills, and labor market issues in emerging economies. My name is Vera Maltseva, and I'm one of the co-founders of the CERE Observatory, and currently an associate professor and director of the Center for Skills Development and Vocational Education at High School of Economics in Moscow. I'm delighted to be moderating the session and appreciate your interest in joining us across institutions, countries, and time zones. And this seminar is the second in our series dedicated to TVET development in major emerging economies. Our aim with these discussions is to somehow illuminate how vocational education systems evolve, how they respond to skill needs, and face common and country-specific challenges. After our last seminar, which focused on Russian TVET, today we turn our attention to the case of China's TVET system. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Professor Jun Li. Professor Li is an associate professor at Tongji University in Shanghai, where he directs the Institute of Educational Economics and Management. He earned his PhD in economic sociology from the University of Cologne in Germany, and is an active member of both the Academic Committee of the Chinese Society of Vocational Technical Education and the Asian Vocational Education Association. Additionally, Professor Jun Li serves as an associate editor of the International Journal of Training and Development. So, Jun, we're very happy to have you today with us. And just before passing the floor to Jun, let me briefly outline how we'll proceed. So Professor Li will begin with the presentation, and when the presentation concludes, we'll open into two interactive segments. First, a Q&A session, and then a round of comments and somehow reflections. So we are very welcome to type your questions in the chat at any time, but I warmly encourage direct questions to voice these questions for richer discussion. So with that, I'm pleased to invite Professor Li to start his presentation. Jun, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vera. Thanks for inviting me to this very interesting conversation and dialogue. I'm wondering whether you can see my screen, the screen that I share. Okay, thank you. Good evening or good day, or depending where you are. Today I'm going to present some basic introduction about TVET in China, the historical development, status quo, and the challenges. So these are the main contents. I gave some general overview of the Chinese TVET system, and then I will go back into history in the past 40 years since the reform and opening politics of China since the late 1970s. And then I will talk about some recent new developmental trends. And in the end, I will address some of the difficulties and challenges of the Chinese TVET systems. So firstly, let me introduce the general overview of the Chinese TVET system. Here you can see this is a graphic of the, this is not basic scale comes later, but this is the graphic of the Chinese education system actually. So as you can see that from grade 1 to 6 is primary education, and from grade 7 to 9 is lower secondary education, and there is one uniform education for almost everyone. But from grade 9 onwards, or after grade 9, there will be a division or streaming between two different directions. One is academic pathway or academic education approach, and another one is vocational education approach. And until now, the two pathways are largely separated from each other, clearly separated from each other. There are attempts to build some other new forms, but that I will come to that later on. But now largely it's two education pathways dividing students. In terms of percentage, unfortunately, we do not have very accurate national data on how many students go to academic track, how many students go to vocational track. But it also depends on the region. In some provinces, it could be something like 60% academic track, 40% vocational track. But in some provinces, it could be variations among the provinces. But basically, we can safely say that in most provinces in China, there are at least something like 30%, at some provinces even up to 50 or even 60% of students choosing vocational track. It's also kind of like because of the schools, vocational schools, there are a certain amount of vocational schools that take up this job. And after, also, then you notice in the graphic that after the upper secondary education, during undergraduate level, there's once again, there's academic track and the vocational track. It is not very often, mostly it's difficult to go from the vocational track to academic track. Not many people do that, but the other way around, it's quite common. So if you go to a academic high school, and then after the 12th grade, you enter a vocational college, which is very common. And also what is very common is after the vocational school on the secondary level, pupils will continue until into the vocational college. There are sometimes, here I said there are two exams. One is entrance examination to upper secondary school. The other one is entrance examination to universities or colleges. But there are programs, what we call articulation programs, that connected the vocational education on secondary level and the vocational education on tertiary level. So there are people who go through examinations. There are also people who go kind of directly from vocational school to a vocational college. There are even colleges that offer 5-year program for the lower secondary school graduates. So once it's also possible, although it's there generally in system, you can see there are upper secondary education and undergraduate program, but there are possibilities to for a student to go from the 9th grade, after 9th grade, directly to like 5-year program. And after that 5-year program, you get like a certificate, not a bachelor degree, but you get a certificate of similar to the certificate that you get at the end of a vocational college. And it's also important to mention that on the tertiary level, most vocational colleges do not provide bachelor degree. So our most our vocational colleges education, it's 3 years. So here it says grade 13 to 15. So that's 3 years. But there are some new established vocational universities that provides a bachelor degree. That is then 4 years. So in China, normally a bachelor degree means a 4 years university education. So that's the minimum requirement of the period of learning. So yeah, basically this is the basics, the graphic of the Chinese education system. And then here is an overview of the basic scale of Chinese TVET. There are some 8,700 some TVET institutions, and among them, the majority of them are on secondary level. So 7,200 vocational schools on higher secondary level, and about 1,500 vocational colleges or universities. But the universities are right now less than 100. So you would say that mostly it's vocational schools on higher secondary level, and then about 1,400 vocational colleges and less than 100 vocational universities. And of course, we are a country of huge population. The number of students, and this is the status in the maybe 2 years ago, the latest statistics, we have more than 30 million students enrolled in vocational education. So vocational schools, vocational colleges, and vocational universities. And among them, as you can see, that around 13 million are in secondary level, so vocational schools, and around 17 million are on tertiary level, so vocational colleges and universities. And it's clear that normally the scale of vocational school is not very large, but some vocational colleges, there could be one vocational college which has students more than 10,000 students, so many students enrolled in one vocational college, which is very common. Here, then I will talk about four very basic facts or characteristics of the Chinese TVET system, very basic facts. The first one is that although we very often talk about TVET, but very often, even in China, within China, for someone like me from university or someone in vocational school, when we talk about TVET, very often we are talking about only one of them. But there are actually two systems of TVET in the broad sense. One for initial vocational education, the other one for adult training, but also some initial TVET. The first one, initial vocational education, is governed under the Ministry of Education. So so if you from the central government to provincial government to city government, and it's all from the Ministry of Education, Bureau of Education, etc. But there's actually also some what we call technical colleges or technical or skilled worker colleges that are governed by Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security. That is, those schools are very different. And I was going to say, they're to a certain degree different from the TVET institutions in the education sense. Actually, the numbers I also mentioned about, they are mainly also the first one, within the first one. So there are even more in the second system. But the second system is not as large as the first one because there is actually some discrimination against them a little bit because in a way that they do not provide the same kind of educational certificate as the first one. So it's tricky. But from now on, mostly when I talk about TVET, I'm talking about the first system, the first TVET system in China. And it's also the most common ones we are talking about. And the second main characteristics is that TVET is largely embedded in school system, in education system. So it's a school system in school form. There are some company enterprises involved in TVET, including providing some internship. There are different kinds of cooperations I would refer to later on. But to a very large extent, you could safely say that the Chinese TVET system is a school-based system, school-based TVET system. The third characteristics is that TVET system is largely public, especially on the secondary level. So you can say that local governments at provincial or city level provide those schools and colleges main financial sources with some central government support through different projects. And secondary school, vocational school are predominantly public. So very, very rare some private vocational schools. Sometimes they're owned by some big companies, but that's very, very rare. We are talking about, we talked about 7,000 vocational schools, but there are, I do not have statistics, but we are talking about maybe a couple of hundreds of like 200 or 300 or even less than that number of private schools. So very, very little. But on college level, on tertiary level, there are 350 private vocational colleges. And the overall vocational colleges are around 1,500. So still smaller percentage are private, but compared to vocational schools, the private sector in vocational colleges or on tertiary level is a bit bigger. And the fourth main characteristics I would argue is it's actually the problem that's faced by many TVET systems in the world is that TVET has relatively low social status or recognition by parents or by students. But in the past, I would say we can safely also say that in the past 2 decades or so, TVET has grown its political significance in the significantly, especially in the past decade. But I very carefully write it here from early 2000 to 2023, and there's nothing significant happening in 2023. But we kind of feel, as researchers feel that in the past 2 or 3 years, that the focus of Chinese education reform is switching once again to higher education, especially to the education of special genius, also especially scientific and engineering talents. So basically, we kind of have the feeling that the central government, especially in Beijing, still pays some attention or giving support to vocational education, but they do not worry too much about vocational schools providing skilled workers and trained workforces for the economy, but they care more about especially in the scientific part, that really trying to educate more researchers and engineers that's equipped, who are better equipped for also the technological competition worldwide. So these are the 4 main characteristics. So as I mentioned, 2 system of TVET, TVET largely a school system. The third, TVET largely public and low social status. You can basically say these are some of the main characteristics. And talking about labor market demands and the relationship between labor market demands and education systems, and these are some of the facts that I also found out, also basically based on literature review. And one thing is that there are mismatches. There have always been mismatches, clearly, especially in the early 2000s. Also from 2001 to 2015, some very highly cited labor market research said something like, there is a supply shortage of labor force with secondary education during that period of time. So from early 2000 to 2015, the skilled forces that trained on the secondary level is not enough for the labor market demands. And there is also a demand shortage of labor force with higher education. So the labor market did not require so much labor forces with higher education. That's some of the labor market researchers has pointed out. So that's from 2001 to 2015. And since 2005, one could argue that there has been an increasing tendency towards polarization of labor market. So especially in manufacturing, employment in manufacturing shows an increasing sign of polarization since 2005, meaning that the labor market requirements or demand for high-skilled workers and low-skilled workers increased, while the labor market demand for mid-level workers kind of declined or decreased during since 2005 until a couple of years ago. The paper was written a couple of years ago. These are 2. And thirdly, since 2010, this is another time, there has been also labor market research, which is kind of a little bit different perspective from the last one, but also pointed out that the labor market demand gradually biased toward high-skilled labor force since 2010. So I'm sorry, it's not 2001, 2010 to 2020, employment share of high-skilled occupations showed a rapid upward trend compared with 5 years ago, so from 2005 to 2010, while employment share of medium-skilled and low-skilled work occupations declined. So it's a little bit contradictory compared to the last one, but this study shows these are all like very good labor market researches written in Chinese on the best Chinese economics journals, labor economics journals. But it's pointed out in the direction that high-skilled work, labor demand for high-skilled workforce has increased. That is what we have in common. It's a clear trend. And the last one concerning labor market demands and education system is that there has been a fast expansion of higher education, and which it leads to a credential inflation in recent years. So basically, with economic growth rates slows down since around 2016. So before 2014, 15, the economic growth rate was like 7% or 8% or even higher. But since 2016, in China, we entering a new norm of economic growth. So it's gradually economic growth declining to 5 or 6% per year. And since that time, the economic growth rate is going down, and simultaneously, higher education is continue to expand. So we can see it right now in social media, in the statistics, very clear that the college graduates are facing very difficult situation in the labor market, or ever increasing difficulties in the labor market in the recent years. And now we can very often hear or read stories that master students are doing the jobs that used to be done by vocational college graduates without a bachelor degree. It's really surprising also. Also, for me as a university teacher, I also see that process happening to my own students. That maybe 6 years ago, when my students graduated with that master degree, it was not so difficult for them to find jobs for example, in international companies or schools. Now it's getting increasingly difficult for them to find a decent job. Okay, so these are this is the first part of my presentation. So the status quo of the Chinese TVET, and then I will briefly introduce some of the key developments in the past 40 years of Chinese TVET. Firstly, so my time frame is from late 1970s to now. So I will talk briefly about what happened before mid 1990s, because well, as our colleagues in Russia know very well, both in Russia and in China, in the late 1980s and 1990s, there were big political and economic changes happening to the society. And in China, and the change was less so dramatic, but still there were some major changes during that time. So basically, you can say that before mid 1990s, the vocational education system was, you can say, it's re-established or recovered. So especially because in the 1960s and the 70s, during the Cultural Revolution in China, which kind of made like many schools were kind of either closed or or turned into general schools. Because in the 1950s, we already established some vocational schools, either from before the 1949 revolution, communist revolution, but also we learned that from also the Soviet Union. So we have schools from the 1950s, 60s, but many of them was damaged. So during the 1960s, 70s. So there was clear attempts also to recover those schools, especially the vocational schools from those period of time. And secondly, also during that time, especially from early 1980s, the economic reform is growing up, is growing, and also it's also very important to know that before 1980s, China is largely an agricultural land with a huge number of huge agricultural population. But now, I think the number I cannot remember clearly. I think more than 75% of Chinese population, or even higher, are living in cities. So we're now a very urbanized society. So during those time, throughout 1980s and also the early 1990s, even actually afterwards, the TVET system has enabled the training of farmers into industrial workers. So we are talking about really millions of farmers, immigrants to cities, some to nearby cities, some to cities far away from their hometown. And the TVET systems in different forms, sometimes also short-term adult training program, sometimes like 3-year program, all different forms of education, adult training, vocational short training program, different kind of program, supported that transfer, the industrial also supported the industrial and economic developments during that time. And as I say, it's very clear, very carefully here, they are trained for skilled and also for many semi-skilled occupations. So many of those skills do not require very high level of skills. Sometimes are semi-skilled, some are even simpler jobs. So that's also I mean, many of them are also simply like learn their skills on the job. That's also very common. So this is the second point. And also the third point concerning before the mid-1990s is that the TVET at that time was closely related to industry in the socialist system. So for a large number of students, TVET normally leads to stable or even lifelong employment in state-owned enterprises with relevant welfare. So basically, during that time, for students to enter vocational school, it was expected. They expect to go directly to a state-owned enterprise. This state-owned enterprises could be an enterprise that belongs to the local city, sometimes belongs to the province, some even belongs to, there are some central government organized enterprises. So it really depends. Of course, most commonly it's just an enterprise in the nearby, it belongs to the city. So, and during that time, and basically you can see in the cities, most of the people are employed, and there is no, or you can say there's very, I wouldn't say no, but relatively low unemployment. So for pupils, for students, they also expect, they go there, they go to school and graduate and enter a factory or enter a shop. And then they, like their parents, they expect to have a very long, stable employment. But in the mid-1990s, there was some major changes. And first one is, of course, I said that those are state-owned enterprises. Many of the state-owned enterprises were private, become private companies. And it's happened in different shape or different forms. across industry, cross sector, and also depending on regions. And for example, in northeast China, which is also close to the Russian border, and those are some of the very older tradition of the socialist factories, and those were where the reform really hit the ordinary people very badly. So those many companies, because they have because on one hand their business was not going on very well, and they do not to produce the things that really labor markets required. Whereas in South China, there have been huge number of private companies emerging from the entrepreneurship of the people, and then so when in those areas is where the state-owned enterprises were really became private in a very dramatic way, we see millions of workers got laid off, became unemployed during the reform. Beginning roughly, depending on the region, 1995, 1996, 1997 onwards to early 2000s. So this is a process that's taken place from mid 90s to you can say to like 2000s. And in China, we used to have this expression of iron ball. So it's like which means a stable or lifelong employment. So you have a bowl of rice. You always have a bowl of rice, but that no longer existed. So we say in Chinese, we have a saying that iron bowl is broken, and so it's then for those workers, and some very often for their children, for their relatives, for their friends, they all see that, and this aspiration toward workers used to be there, but now disappeared on a very large scale. And now people know, well, this kind of enterprises which has been there for like 40 years or even longer time, it suddenly became really bankrupt or disappeared. Then they say, why should my children go to this kind of school? And simultaneously, this takes place a bit later than that. This begins in 1999, the year I entered university. This is the expansion of higher education. So there were different reasons behind that, but basically, since 1999, and higher education admission expanded dramatically. And here, this is a very new phenomenon, but traditional Confucius value, and maybe I have written it wrong here, but Confucius, you know what I mean. So the Chinese Confucius value is kind of re-emerged, and it's kind of awaked people's pursuit of culture and degrees. So there has always been a respect for educated people, for someone who reads a lot, someone who has a lot of knowledge, who knows the world very well. And of course, university education fits in that direction very well. And then the families prefer college education compared to TVET education. And the two reasons combined, of course, TVET became really almost the last education option for really millions of families. So this is what happened from the mid 1990s to 2000s, early 2000s. And when this happened, I think, if I remember correctly, as early as 2003 or 2005, there have been reports, there have been stories about shortages of workers, especially in south and southeast part of China. So then people notice that if everyone is, not everyone, but people are just going to colleges, no one is trained as workers, that's a big problem. Therefore, as I introduced here, relatively rapidly, the central government responded to this changes that happened earlier, this decline of TVET. So the central government started to invest huge amounts of money. And also simultaneously since 2001, China entered WTO. That's also when the economic growth became even faster. So the government has even higher also financial capability to invest in education, which also includes vocational education. So these are some of the examples of central government's efforts to boost TVET during that period of time. So the first one is National Demonstrative Secondary Vocational School Construction Program. In China, it's very often to say, for example, we want to develop something. It's very often we select some good ones, so we select some demonstrative ones. That's the Chinese way of saying it. To invest money in a how can I say, a selected minority, you can say, a selected minority, and invest heavily on it, put a lot of money in it to boost, because we are a huge country, we cannot give money to everyone in the beginning, so we start with some schools. So as you can see, 10 billion yuan, so that's like 1 billion, like a bit more than 1 billion euros or something, 100 schools. So as you can see, each school gets quite a lot of money for this program. And so this has been going on for several years. So it's not one time 100 schools. There are followed-up programs. It's with different names, but very similar programs or similar approaches. Basically, these schools buy facilities like training facilities, for example, like machinery, equipment, tools, electric facilities, etc., etc. And also very often they train teachers, and they also provide curriculum development methods, all different hardware and software input in their schools. And the second one is student financial aid. So as you can see, there are, and this begins especially since 2009. But as you can see, there are tuition fee free policy. Basically, you can say that since 2009, for vocational schools, for the majority of vocational schools, it became tuition free. Because it's also important to note that for general high school, it's not tuition free. So if you go to vocational track, yeah, it's free of charge. But if you go to academic track, there is a tuition fee. And university as well. For university, we have tuition fee. It's not very high. It's not very high, but it's still for many families, it's still some burden for the family. So this tuition free policy also for some families it could be attractive, and also there are student grants. And the third one, which is actually similar to the first one, is basic capacity building program. So there are also some billion yuan, some on different practical training basis. These training bases, many of them, I see here, over 4,000 training bases, many of them are located in vocational schools or vocational colleges, sometimes in training centers in the cities, but sometimes in vocational colleges. And also, as you can see, some money, some investment in teacher training. And so as you can see, these are just some of the examples. There are many other projects. And also important to note to mention that beside this central government efforts to invest in TVET, the provincial governments have also invested in TVET, especially in the south and the southeast part of China, where the provinces are rich. In Zhejiang and Jiangsu and Guangdong, these provinces also have a kind of similar programs on their provincial level. So these are the historical developments, and then I will come to what has been taken place in recent years. So recent development trends. So first one, for the past decade or so, in the past 10, since about 2012, 2013, there has been a phrase we called modern TVET system, in China, which basically means that modern TVET system, because we in the Chinese expression 体系, that's the word. It was not used so much before 2012 or 2013, but recently it has become more dominant or more present. So this basically means higher permeability between TVET and general education, and also TVET and higher education. But it's also very important to notice that here, the higher education mainly refers to TVET on tertiary level. So see, in the second point is that, so they want to build basically two systems. So academic track and a vocational track. The academic track, you can go from bachelor to master to PhD, etc. And the vocational track, it used to be just vocational schools and vocational colleges and no bachelor degree. But now, in the past few years, there have been vocational school on secondary level, vocational colleges, 3 years program, and then vocational university, 4 years program. So that's more. And there has been some talks about maybe, we do not know, but there has been even, it's not just media talk, but in the government documents saying that in an appropriate time, maybe we will develop some degrees, master degrees on the vocational track. I personally do not know what it looks like, but that's the idea. So we have the vocational academic track and the vocational track. So provide, you can see provide in a way mobility as well towards a higher degree. And it is also important to mention that increasingly it has become very key to attract middle school graduates to choose vocational school or to choose vocational track in general if we provide this permeability. And the second one, simultaneously, the government is also, or it's not just government, also the different other institutions or researchers have been really stressing the importance of increase or enhance industry TVET connection or relationship. So there has been, so the stronger industry involvement in TVET is advocated and encouraged. Programs such as modern apprenticeship was introduced. I said here, and modern apprenticeship is because in Chinese we call it modern apprenticeship, and because I knew this policy very well, and it's I kind of knew the inside story of this policy. It is basically, it's a British concept, it's an English concept, but it's what we actually aim to achieve is similar to the German system, to the German dual training system, where companies get deeply involved in vocational education, where we even want to say something like students spend a certain period of time in school, certain period of time in companies, and they rotate. That's the idea. And also the government is also providing subsidies for training company. Once again, it is a concept that we adapted from the German case, which they have but it's kind of different. They have their training company, but it's kind of like recognized. But here it's more like policy initiatives to provide incentives for companies to provide training positions and to provide internships. So these are the two trends. And then the third one is that there are some multiple tasks are given to TVET schools and colleges. And for instance, TVET schools should provide vocational guidance to pupils of general schools. This is also relatively new. In Shanghai, it has been carried out a bit for longer period of time, but in a national scale, it's a bit new. It basically says that because as I said in the first page, that the pupils will decide which track they will go to after the 9th grade, but very often the pupils have no idea where to go to, what can I do. So we developed this idea. So we provide pupils at primary school, at lower secondary school, some opportunities to know different occupations, to know different options of further education, further study. So basically, we open the doors of vocational schools. For example, in Shanghai, the very common practice, which is also implemented later on in many provinces, is that we open the door of vocational schools for 1 or 2 weeks during the year. It's normally May when the weather is good, but it's also before because in June and July we have examinations, entrance examinations. So sometimes April to May, probably May, and open the door of the vocational schools, and parents or pupils can go to vocational schools to try different things. And my own kids even went to those kind of things, those kind of activities. It's sometimes becomes even kind of like cultural or interesting, entertaining activities where they practice different painting things on a cloth, and they practice different small electric instruments. They play with some of the facilities that they have there. They have in vocational schools, of course, under the guidance of teachers there. So this is especially in regions where you have quite a few good vocational schools. This has become quite popular. It's also expected from the local government. And secondly, this especially in the past few years, there has been it's even written in the central government's annual report to the Congress, saying that TVET institutions or colleges should help training laid-off workers, immigrant farmer workers, and even veterans. It's written there. So TVET institutions not just recruit students from high schools, but also students of different backgrounds. And also there have been quite a few interregional sports of TVET between provinces. So I have friends, or I have even master students, part-time master students who went to Yunnan province, from Shanghai to Yunnan provinces, which is more than 3,000 kilometers away, to stay there for a year and a half to be a automobile teacher there. Their job is normally actually here in Shanghai, but they were sent there for a year and a half, and to kind of also to teach the local, not just students, as well as to provide some guidance to the local teachers. Very often the teachers here in Shanghai or other provinces in east part of China have better education background, so that they go there, they train the teachers there. And the last point of developmental trends, as I put here, is other aspects. Is the first one is increasing internationalization of Chinese TVET to other developing countries. As some of you might know, that China is developing this Belt and Road Initiative, and we are, it's because there are in some cases, in some countries, there have been some Chinese investments in those countries. So they also need the local workers to be trained in a way that they are most familiar with. Therefore, also government encourage vocational colleges to have different cooperations with local colleges, also to some vocational colleges even open like a branch, like a local school there, and help training the workers. And in China, the last point is it's for China, for vocational schools. It's a big thing that there are many competitions in China. There are we all know world skill competition, and there are many local forms of competitions, and those kind of competitions have been very often the focus of their daily work in some of the vocational schools and colleges. Okay, and so this is my last point. I will talk about some of the difficulties and challenges that we face in the Chinese TVET. And the first one is relatively low social status, despite increase in political significance, which I mentioned in the beginning. So basically, we can see there have been series of high-level policies issued regarding TVET with the purpose to improve quality and contribution to industry, etc. But still, parents and students still unwilling to choose TVET, leading to a relatively poor learning ability and attitude of students at TVET institutions. And many of those students still regard them as like a loser from their past education experiences. That really has a very negative impact on education, TVET quality in general. The second difficulty is that there has been increasing although there have been increasing permeability between TVET and higher education. However, this has led the students to pursue even higher degrees. They are less inclined or interested in working in factories, especially when used to be they go to factory after 3 years of vocational schools. Now they get 3 years college degree, and they say, now I'm a college graduate, why should I work in a factory on the shop floor with my hands dirty and doing all those work? They are not willing to do that, and this continues with colleges. Some of the college graduates want to go to bachelor degree, and then they say, why should I do those jobs with a college degree? So it's really damaging the industry relevance of TVET. And oops, sorry, the headline is wrong. Maybe I used the wrong version. But anyway, the third point is that there has been conflicts between regional divergence and increased centralization of TVET. So basically, it's a fact that we have different provinces, different regions of very different levels of economic and social development. But we have been observing an increasing degrees of centralization of TVET in the past few years, which we are worried about, because the central government is increasingly giving guidelines that really laid out some very concrete items, concrete measures that vocational colleges, vocational schools should do. But from our perspective, from research perspectives, we think that those measures may be suitable for certain provinces, could be a good measure in some provinces, but it's not necessarily always a good measure in another circumstances. So this increasing centralization, very concrete measures or points made by the central government could be controversial. Could even have some negative impact on other provinces. But in the end, I would mention here, I used also opportunities and also a Chinese word, weiji. Weiji is actually in Chinese means, what is that? Weiji, risk or something. But basically in the Chinese word, weiji is that it has wei is danger, ji is, however, opportunities. So we say, and always we see in our language, also in our culture, we see that when there is a danger, when there is a risk, there's also a potential opportunity for that's also, I think, maybe for many people, it's also behind that there is a certain degree of entrepreneurship. So on the one hand, I want to mention 2 points. Is that the development of industry has been really quite solid in the past 2 decades or so. So we really see that in some of the many of the companies that with their increased productivity, and they have higher and or I say the better requirements and also capacity for human resource development and human resource requirements. For instance, we are also participating in some of those projects. One Chinese company, no international background. It's a Chinese company. It's the owner is also with some technician background. Very technological oriented company, private company focusing on manufacturing, and has spent how much money? That's like something like 700 million yuan. 700 million yuan to establish their own school to train workers, to train their own workers. So as we have observed this is one individual case, but increasingly we have seen companies, not just international companies, not just European and Japanese and American companies, but also Chinese local companies, not because of government incentives, but also because of their own technological development, their own awareness. They say, we want to invest in training of workforces. And that is happening place on an ever larger scale in China. So also, second point is also with the technological developments, and there have been replacements of simple manual occupations and tasks by robots, by different things. So in those cases, the companies are also, I also interviewed some of those companies. They say, we used to just recruit simple manual workers. Now we really need workers who are able to not just operate manually, simply repeating simple tasks, but really more complicated tasks. So they are really reaching out to local vocational schools to look for cooperation. Oh, I'm sorry, here, I made a mistake here. Not developmental industry, but expansion of higher education. I mentioned earlier that the inflation of certificates is a problem for college graduates, but it's in a way, it's also to a certain degree, in certain cases, it's also making the parents or making people aware that, if I just pursue an education degree, it might be still difficult for me to find a job later on. But some of the high quality TVET colleges have been providing good job opportunities. Then the people realize that, well, if you go to some of those universities of general education, you may find yourself jobless after graduation. But if you choose some of the TVET colleges, you can have a good job, or you can have at least maybe technician job or skilled worker job. So it's possible. So high quality TVET colleges are already becoming attractive options. There are already in some, for example, in Guangdong and also here in Shanghai, you see some of the entrance examination requirements in terms of their performance in examinations has become higher. So, okay, I think that's all to my presentation, and it's about an hour. I hope the time is correct. I'm also here giving the advertisements for the next seminar, so upcoming CERE seminar. So it's it's in 2 months, right? So it's every 2 months, yes. And 27th of November, and the topic is Indian TVET, between informality and ambition. A very interesting topic. Yeah, and thank you very much. If you have questions here, you contact Vera and Maxime. Thank you very much.
Yeah.